Welcome everyone to the third in our series of Share Your Journeys talks. Today we are really excited to have Dr. Jennifer Quinlan, who is a professor and interim chair of the Departments of Nutrition Sciences and Food and Hospitality Management at CNHP. Her areas of expertise include food safety risks for low-income and minority populations and consumer food safety education. Her lab's work with low-income and minority consumers represents community to benchtop research. That's a new word I learned today, benchtop. It has surveyed risks for foodborne illness in both homes and retail stores. It has surveyed the use of GIS mapping to identify potential differences in food safety risks for these populations as well. Dr. Quinlan's lab has also collaborated with Drexel's Plasma Institute to explore the potential of non-thermal plasma to eliminate Campylobacter and Salmonella from the surface of raw poultry. You might all know Dr. Quinlan. She's really famous for her work on Don't Wash Your Chicken. And the work has now led to development and dissemination of a highly visible consumer education campaign around safe preparation of raw poultry. Dr. Quinlan currently serves on the editorial boards of Food Protection Trends and the Journal of Food Protection. She has served on USDA's National Advisory Committee for Microbiological Criteria for Foods and is a former Fulbright scholar to Corvinus, University in Budapest, Hungary. So welcome, Dr. Quinlan. We are really excited to hear of your journey today.
So thank you. I'll share my screen. Thank you for having me. Okay. So thank you for inviting me, Darren and Dr. Kaimal. As I told them, I really had a good time putting this together. I know you may not care that much about food microbiology, so don't worry, we're not talking about food microbiology today. We're mostly talking about my journey, and the way I really put my journey together when I stopped to sit and think about it was in terms of people. So it's going to be a very personalized journey, and I'm happy to talk to you guys if you have questions about some of the decisions that I made. So that's the way I approached it today. And like I said, I had fun putting it together. So again, just for those of you that don't know me, which is most of you, I am a food microbiologist. I was trained as a laboratory food microbiologist, which is that benchtop that Girjia just talked about. So that's how I was trained, but I really transitioned to a community food microbiologist in my academic career, and I'll talk about how that worked. My funded research has focused on food safety risks for minority, low-income, and vulnerable populations. And then current research is related to consumer education of food safety. So again, just so you guys know where I'm coming from, but I'm not going to go into too much detail into the individual work. You can all read the papers. So I thought way back to, when I was 18, and, I realized that my personal experiences and development have very much influenced my professional trajectory. I was a first-generation college student, so I was intent to get my bachelor's degree, and that was it. I really didn't have aspirations to go on to graduate school. You guys are all young, so you may not remember, but I started into college. This is We Are the World. You should have heard the song at least, We Are the World. And there was a huge amount of focus on hunger in Africa. And I was going into food science in the mid 80s, and I was going to feed the world at 18. And I think hopefully we all think we're going to change the world at 18, because if you don't think you will at 18, it only gets bleaker after that. So this was my goal. I was going to go feed the world. And I went in and I took in my sophomore year, there was a class and it was called Ending Hunger. And I thought, well, here it is. There's a class for me to tell me how to do this. And what I very quickly learned was that feeding the world was more about political and policy changing and everything. I loved my food science. I loved the lab. I was not an activist. I knew I wasn't going to be. And so I was devastated that I wasn't probably going to feed the world, given the real challenges in feeding the world. And instead, I was content. I enjoyed, my food science. I enjoyed the science and math and applying it to food. And it wasn't until I was a senior that I was, planning on looking for jobs. And I was in a food chemistry class, and Dr. George Carmen, who looked a lot younger and didn't have this title at that time, but he was then a young associate professor, and he pulled me aside. He was teaching the course, and he said, "You need to work in my lab." And I didn't know what that meant. I said, "Sure, I'll try it." And sure enough, by the time he was NIH funded to work on lipids, and by the midway through my senior year in college, he had offered me a research assistantship to work in his laboratory. I ended up getting an MS and did my thesis on something called phosphorylation of phosphatidic acid in Saccharomyces cerevisiae. You'll see I've come very far away from that. So just to give you an idea, just because you get your training in something, it teaches you how to do the science. It doesn't commit you to that science. But what I very later in my career realized, and every time you see 3 asterisks, that's my little life lessons. So throughout this, I've done little life lessons. I realized that, what George saw in me was that I could write well. And so what I took away and what I have applied in my own experience with students is if you can write well and communicate your science to other people, you are 75 or 80% of the way there. And I see it now too in students. And if I see a student who can write well, I say, do you want to, are you interested in research? And sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. So, but I owe a lot to him because, again, I only worked with him for 2.5 years, but I really had no ambitions to go into graduate school and didn't know what that trajectory looked like until he pulled me aside and said, "You can do this." So having said that, phosphatidic acid phosphatase was not for me. I did not want to get my PhD in it because that does kind of commit you to a field. And I realized he would have been very happy. Many people went in and got their degrees, and I realized I didn't want to end up in that basic research, basic NIH research, funded research. So I was sent to the Department of Food Science at North Carolina State University. And I was sent to work under a young new professor, Peggy Fogading, who had just gotten tenure and had 2 small children. And I remember well standing on the, out in the parking lot with another faculty member who said, you need to go work with her. She'll teach you what you need to know. With the idea that, what I needed to know was how to have a scientific career. And I had just been married during my master's degree, and how to, manage a family and a scientific career. And so I went to Peggy to learn what I needed to know, to kind of what we would have said back then in the early 90s, to kind of have it all, right? That was the idea back then. I think there's a little bit more talk about life work balance at this point. I did work with Peggy and I got my PhD, a slightly more applied area, but again, a benchtop, a wet lab experience. Monoclonal antibodies for the detection of bacterial spores in food was my dissertation. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of Peggy, and that's because about 3 months when I got there, she was diagnosed with breast cancer, and this was the early 90s. And I watched her over the next probably about 10 years fight cancer. It went into remission, it came back. And the bottom line is, I watched what decisions somebody makes when they're faced with limited time with their family versus, their career. And so she taught me a lot of life lessons. And I really, changed probably my trajectory a little bit, because it really impacts you when you see somebody make those important decisions. So again, I learned a lot. It wasn't what I thought I was going to learn from her. One of the gifts I feel like she gave me was this phrase, "I don't know." She was, a wonderful mentor, and she was new to monoclonal antibodies, and I was forging this new path in her lab, and she was confident enough to say, "I don't know, let's find out." And I don't know, you're going to find a lot of PhDs who don't know how to say they don't know. And we all know that once we get our PhDs, what we know is in our field. There's a lot we still don't know. And so I always have considered that a gift that she gave me, was this ability and confidence to say, "I don't know." And life lessons here is mentorship matters, and mentorship in your field matters. Again, she was a wonderful mentor and helped me to develop as a scientist at this level. However, having lost her, I did lose that close mentor in my field. And so you should keep close ties and with those mentors that you have, because they really do matter. Even if you don't keep up every year or something, that you should keep ties. And then life happens, right? So my husband and I were both pursuing our PhDs. And again, because of my experience with Peggy, I didn't run off to a postdoc right away. What I did was, there was a local position available in government as chief agricultural microbiologist in the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. I took that for a while as my husband finished his PhD, and then we were both ready to transition, and we moved to Cape Cod, and where he pursued a postdoc, and we had 2 small children. And so this is one of the many places where you make life decisions about whose career you're following at what time and where you're going to go. And having said that, I knew I wanted to keep my hands in things. And being in food microbiology, there's limited places you can go. And on Cape Cod, I had to pivot and work instead and use my microbiology background. So I did some academia, I did some adjuncting, and then at this contract test service lab, it's a pharmaceutical company essentially. And so I really, got some very different experiences here. And I don't know if I mentioned, but so we had 2 small children. So this was, I kind of was balancing where I was in my career with where I was with my family. So from these experiences, they were very valuable. I really think the first one actually really led to my first grant. I learned that the more tools you have in your toolbox, the greater your options. So don't turn down something because it's not exactly along the lines of what you want to do, because you may learn something that you do want to do. Most importantly, I learned it's important to learn what you don't want to do. So again, I had been in academia. I spent 5 years in government. I worked in industry in the contract test lab. And I realized I want to do academia. So this really made me have seen a number of different situations and realize what I did want to do. And so we transitioned to the Mid-Atlantic area. Again, this is part of the life changes. Why did we end up in the Mid-Atlantic area? We had 2 small children for a few years and lived far away from our families. And we just realized if we were both going to work, that was going to be a real challenge. So we kind of limited where we looked. And so where I ended up was back here at Drexel. I was hired as an instructor into the Department of Bioscience and Biotechnology, which is where nutrition used to be as a program within that. And I really just intended to use this position to get back into academia. That was really my goal, is I just need to get back. And so this, it was grueling, and it makes me, I'm glad I did it, because it makes me really sensitive now to teaching faculty, because I know what they go through, because I was there teaching the equivalent of 48 credits a year. But again, it was really intended as a jumping point. And at that time, the department chair was another great mentor of mine, Mary Kay Howitt, who is professor in biosciences and biotechnology. And so I knew what I wanted to do at this point. I wanted to get back into academia. I wanted to put myself in a position where I was competitive to get a tenure track position. And so I was writing grants at the same time that I was teaching this 48 credit equivalent. And in 2004, I was awarded a seed grant from USDA. That's their training grant. That's the equivalent of their training grant. And back then it was about $100,000. And the grant was examination of the effect of socioeconomic factors on food quality and safety. And so this really goes to this community to benchtop. So I'm going to take you off on a little side story here because it relates to something the dean said in her talk. And that is, it's a place where my personal experience interacted with what I saw as an opportunity within my field. And so back when I was at Rutgers getting my bachelor's and my master's degrees, I volunteered as a big sister in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So if you know New Brunswick, it's a very poor area right next to the university, similar to what we see in Philadelphia, unfortunately. And so I volunteered as a big sister, and I would hang out with this young woman, and she always wanted to go to the store. And that was the big thing to do, was go to the store. And I was a graduate student and I needed food too. So I'd pick something up, but I noticed that this store was awful. I mean, the store that they had access to walking was really terrible. And if I bought meat there, I had to freeze it immediately. I had to use it or freeze it. And so this made me aware of this, you know, from a firsthand perspective of this food deserts concept. And it was actually a magazine. I remember it very well. I actually saved it after I got my grant. But it was a magazine article about food deserts that made me look at this issue that was being highlighted and say, wait, I could put some data to that. From my experience running labs, I knew that I could put some data to this concept of poor quality food in food deserts. And that's where that grant came from. That's where the idea of that grant came from. And again, it was funded. And so here I am in 2005, 2000, you know, ready in a position to go for a tenure track position. And so now what? So again, another decision point. And to be honest, I did look at other universities, and I ended up at Drexel, not just because I had gotten a grant, and I stress that to people because it had to be, there happened to be a position open at Drexel at the same time that I was looking at other universities. And I interviewed for that position, and my colleagues took me out to lunch. And so it was a competitive interview process to get into the tenure track. So I just stress that to people, because when people hear, oh, I went from instructor to tenure track, that wasn't an automatic. That was a matter of good timing and an interview process. And so I ended up obviously staying at Drexel in a tenure track position at that point. An aside, unfortunately, within the year of my getting there, Mary Kay Howitt was diagnosed with leukemia. And so I continued to watch her. She fought it for about 6 or 7 years. She was another great mentor to me. And these two women, in addition to mentoring me, I'd like to think that they taught me how to be a good mentor. And some of my favorite quotes from her, probably the most relevant, you have to have a thick skin to go into academia. So just realize that, whether it's a thick skin with respect to the student evaluations that you're getting, or whether it's a thick skin with respect to the feedback you're getting on your grants, because with a 10 to 15% funding rate, you're going to get 4 rejections for every acceptance you get, you know. So she was, I think that was one of the big takeaways I got from her, is that you really have to have a thick skin if you want to go into academia. And so, you know, Drexel, my career by the numbers, and I'll say, I kind of sum this up, and I'll have another slide on it, because there wasn't a lot of decision making at this point. I was in the system, and you know, you go for professor, you go for a tenure, you go for your grants, you go for a professor if you get it, you know, if you're eligible. And so I had a series of grants. When I was able, I took a sabbatical. I was able to get a sabbatical grant. And I can talk to you a little bit more. One of the, there's certainly been mistakes along the way. I put all my eggs in one basket in this sabbatical grant. And just a heads up to those of you that want to go into funded research, you never want to see a gap in your funding. It's not good. And so I should have been more aggressive in diversifying my grants. And so when I put all my eggs in one basket and it didn't come through in 2017 like I thought it would, I started scrambling and writing grants like crazy and putting in multiple grants in multiple areas, and fortunately was able to get funding again. So again, I'm happy to entertain any questions anybody has about that. But one of what I can now look back and say, oh, I shouldn't have thought that was definitely going to work. So this is, again, the career by the numbers, and there weren't decisions at this point. This was pretty straightforward. You know, you get in, and I won't kid you, I just enjoyed it. I mean, I was loving doing the research. I was loving mentoring the students. I was enjoying learning what I was learning on these grants. An aside, one of the things I did learn throughout these is the importance of collaborators and interdisciplinary research. And sorry, I didn't have time to pull out all their titles and all. I'm just going to walk through. Having said that, some of you might know Shivanti Anandan. I don't know. I know some of the people within faculty at Drexel do. I don't know if postdocs would. But anyway, my first grant, I didn't have a lab. I literally didn't have a lab. I was teaching faculty, and she was on my first grant because I was using her laboratory. It was her facilities and equipment that we were able to use. So she's a microbiologist. I collaborated, not a stretch there. Food microbiologist and a microbiologist made sense. My first standard grant, this is Allison Evans from the School of Public Health. And she is an epidemiologist, and she was co-PI on my first standard grant. On my second standard grant, Susan Stein from the School of Communications helped us with formative research around the consumer research that we were doing. And so these are all internal to Drexel. And then New Mexico State University, this is Barb Chamberlain and Jeannie Gleason. They were collaborators on one of my past grants as well as my current grant. And then I've just recently on this last grant partnership with the Partnership for Food Safety Education, who will house our next education materials that we're developing now. So I show it, and it was only after I put it together that I realized they're all females, and that was not something I set out to do. That just is a coincidence. But what this taught me, and what I would tell people to look at, is I learned so much about different disciplines. And I think that's one of the things that this type of forum can do, is educate you about different disciplines, because I didn't realize the different funding opportunities for different disciplines. So you've heard from John Deutsch, who talked about his industry funding. And then you heard from Dean Gitlin, who has this phenomenal NIH funding. And I just showed you USDA, and USDA is never going to have the kind of funding that NIH has. So their grants are in the couple $100,000 range for 2 to 3 years versus the large NIH. So I think it's important to just understand going forward where you are and what the standards are in your field and what the expectations are in your field. So again, the expectations of different disciplines, what is consistent funding in your discipline. I'm happy to see a recognition within the university more lately, a recognition that there is research that is non-funded. It's social science research sometimes that doesn't necessarily can be done without large amounts of funding, and other types of research that is becoming more respected at the university level, which I think is good. The language of different disciplines, trying to publish our public health research that mixed public health and basic microbiology was really challenging, because the public health people didn't want all that microbiology information, and the microbiology people didn't understand that public health language. So it, really was eye-opening. And then, as I think this has been talked about more in the college, I don't know if it within this group, but the publishing in different disciplines, just as simple as, where does your name go? Where is it important that your name be? In my field, in nutrition, in food science, you want to be the last person on that publication. That indicates that but I have come to learn that there are fields where you want to be the first person on that publication. Whereas in my field, the first person on the publication is generally the student who did the lab work, essentially. So again, I just think that was one of the things I learned in my journey that has been really enlightening. And that I think once you understand it and embrace it, can really set your research apart when you differentiate it from others. And then I showed you Drexel by the numbers, and then I realized, but my career at Drexel by what matters is really in these pictures. So these are certainly not all, but many of the master's and master of public health students that I've mentored, and doctoral students that I've mentored, and only a few of the undergraduate. There's many more undergraduate. So I did have fun putting this together, and I can tell you, like, she's now tenured at University of Maryland, and let's see, she works for the FDA, and she's now on an NIH postdoc. So I mean, this is really, when you're having a bad day yourself, it's really nice to look back at what what would be called your academic children. And so to see that they're doing well and to see what they're doing has always been fun to follow. So to the degree that, they'll obviously at different stages, they'll reach out. Dr. Quinlan, can you write me a letter, and I'll email back. And I said, I'm happy to write you a letter, but don't you dare email me without sending me a picture of that baby, because I know that baby has gotten bigger than the last time I saw it. So I really enjoy watching them grow in their careers. And then I don't want to forget, probably a highlight of my pandemic experience here has been working with some of you probably, I don't know if you guys would have overlapped with Abby. Abby took on a 1-year postdoc with me at the beginning of the pandemic. We were doing.
She joined us. She joined us for the year. Yeah.
Yeah. So working with her and working with Melissa Kavanaugh, who's a PhD student, and Chris Fatral. And this year, they actually went and presented in Phoenix this year. This was really a highlight of my year, to feel like we were continuing to be productive and do work virtually and nationally. So again, this to me, as I hope that I'm able to mentor them in the way that Peggy and Mary Kay helped me. So just an aside, one of the best things, I say there's 3 things I did right as a mother, and this is one of them. And my kids are now 22 and 25. So there's 3 things I did right as a mother, and I didn't know it at the time, but taking them away and letting them see the world at the ages they happened to be, I think 4th and 7th grade. And my son would kill me if he knew I was showing you pictures of him in middle school. But this was just a great experience for them and for me. We just really, seeing the world and seeing a different perspective. And this is really one of the things I hope to follow up with. Their ages were perfect right then. And so realize going forward, for those of you that want to integrate families and travel in your career, you don't want to take them as infants, but you also can't disrupt their high school career, because then you mess up the whole college application thing. So this is something I hope to pursue again. It's been a while, and I had hoped to get back to it sooner. So I did do, and I don't think anyone ever told me this, I did do what I would call a mid-career reevaluation. So somewhere around 2017, 2018, I came back from my sabbatical, and I really had to think about, okay, funding is tough. And this is a place, and I would tell you, I know you're far away from it now, but tuck this away in the back of your head and think about it, because I wasn't. It came up and I'm like, oh, what do I do now? And I realized that many people go through this. And I really think this is why they developed this provost fellowship, is because many people do go through this in their mid-career after they've gotten tenure. And do they want to continue to do research and aggressively pursue research, or do they want to? Many faculty say, I love teaching. I just want to really focus on teaching. I'll do research to some degree, but I don't want to do the aggressive research I did. I want to do teaching. And then other faculty look at it and say, I want to do administration. And so the Provost Fellowship was an opportunity to work with an associate provost, and with basically we monthly met with provosts as well as other faculty doing these provost fellowships. We had projects that we did, and basically we got to see what was going on, what's being done at the administrative level. So it's kind of to train mid-career faculty on what working in administration would look like if that's what they choose to do. I realized that's not what I wanted to do. And it became very clear, and I literally announced it at the last presentation. I said, you know what, this isn't what I wanted to do. And part of what made me aware of that was that while I was in the middle of that provost fellowship, my current grant was funded, and I realized I got so much more joy out of writing that grant and getting that funded and looking forward to doing that work that I didn't get out of the administrative. And so I really decided, I don't think administrative is for me. Having said that, you might have noticed my title is interim chair. So this is what happens when you decide you don't want to do something. So this is kind of where I have ended up. And so I play 2 roles now, and one of them, and the reason I've included certain faculty on here, it's not being particular certain faculty, but the bottom line is I was asked to step up. When Dr. Volpe left last year, I was the logical person. I could do it. I had the most experience. I was in a tenure track position. And so I really stepped up, and I stepped up for these people. I stepped up for my colleagues. And again, the reason I happen to choose these is they've actually been with me. All of these faculty have been in nutrition for about 14 or 15 years. So they've been through even before we came to CNHP. So I guess my lesson there is sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you're asked to step up and you have to do it, and you do it. And like I said, I was happy to do it. Although I did note Dr. Deutsch noted in his that I was reluctant as an interim chair, and he was exactly right. I have not kidded anybody about that. That's been a running joke, is that no, I do not want the permanent chair position. Having said that, like anything, when you're pushed to do something, you learn. And so I have learned a tremendous amount being interim chair that I kind of didn't need to see when I was faculty. And I've learned a lot of it as I'm chair. But so I anticipate this will come to an end within the next year at some point. And then, so this is where my administrative role is right now, but in my career as now, Girjia, you say they know, but this was way back in 2013, 2014. So some of them might not even know the Don't Wash Your Chicken education campaign. And in fact, but the bottom line was, when that came out, we did get a lot of media attention. In fact, my current grant is to develop the next generation of education materials to be disseminated next year. So I can say I have established myself as, one of the leading food safety consumer educators in the country. And that's kind of where, and it's a small field. We're a small, again, comparing fields and what you can expect in different fields, we're a small field relatively. So to come full circle with where I am now, I started out, as I told you, to feed the world at 18. And when this all hit the media about 30 years later, and I had 3 degrees and 2 kids and 4 cats and dogs, and I realized that my contribution to the world wasn't going to be to feed the world, that more likely my contribution was going to be a little less diarrhea in the world. Having said that, I shared that with the then dean, and she came back and she said, she was a nurse, and she said, Jen, as a nurse, I think a little less diarrhea in the world is a wonderful thing. So I think, like I said, I hope you feel like you're going to change the world now, because, and again, I still think I'd like to think I had impact, but I think you realize when you get here, and I'm not at the end yet. I just want to point out, I still have many years left. So I am actually at one of those decision points now, even in my career, where I'd like to start to expand what I'm doing. So, and continue what I have done successfully in the past.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. That was fascinating. I especially loved how you started out, feed the world and less diarrhea. It's really all about caring, right? It's caring. Was it Gloria Donnelly?
Yeah, it was Gloria Donnelly. Yeah, that's what she was dean when that was all making the media. Yeah, so
yeah.
Like I said, I think we have to revise our expectations as we go on in our career, So.
Yeah. Can I ask you like a simple question before we dive into it? So should you wash your other meats, or is this just for chicken?
Yeah, so again, for postdocs, because I'm amazed. I mean, our current research is finding that a lot of people just haven't heard this message yet. Yeah. So message postdocs, just in case you do, I should have asked you when you were, but you should not wash your chicken. That's the message, is don't wash your chicken. And it's because we know that there are pathogens on poultry, and so if you cook it, they die. But if you wash it, you introduce the opportunity for them to spread into the sink or and so along those lines, no, Dr. Kaimal, that's you shouldn't wash your fish. You shouldn't wash your beef. Yeah. So to be honest, that goes back to your fish shouldn't smell that you feel like you need to wash it. So, but it is a little confusing. So any raw meats or poultry or fish would potentially have pathogens on them. And so there's no need you're not going to wash all the pathogens off with water. That's all there is to it. And there's nothing else to wash off. And as long as you cook it sufficiently, then that's fine. It's a little confusing though, because we do tell people wash your produce, right? Mm-hmm. So you wash your produce. You should wash your unwashed lettuce and your fruit. So that, I think, is part of the confusing part of the message. Yeah, is that we tell you to wash some things, and then we're telling you not to wash other things. Yeah.
Right, especially stuff that you're cooking, right? Like a lot of produce you might eat raw. So
yeah.
but very helpful to know. I always wondered about
Yep.
that, whether it was just the chicken. All right. So this was really, really great to hear. I can start us off with some questions, and everyone, you're welcome to add it to the chat or just sort of raise your hand and add your questions in there. Yeah? You're welcome to unmute yourself. This is sort of like our open
Okay.
discussion part. Right. So I'll start us off with a few questions. Was there anything that really surprised you? So, sort of looking back, you're like, oh, I should have. I never thought I'd reach this point or this particular. Like, was there anything that really surprised you on your journey that you hadn't thought of or considered?
Right. The things that are coming to mind are, I'm trying to think if there's anything I didn't include in the talk.
Mm-hmm.
Because the things that are coming to mind are the differences in fields really surprised me. I mean, the differences in expectations, the differences in language. Everybody says, oh, interdisciplinary work, transdisciplinary work, and the challenges to be able. So everybody wants you to do that work, but to publish that work, you have to speak two languages to try to publish that work. And so that, to me, it took me a while to get familiar with my publication, where I could be publishing and who I had to be writing to. And that surprised me because in my training, you wrote it as a lab microbiologist and you presented it and that was all you did.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I kind of transitioned to more of a public health type of, I realized that there's whole different languages. And again, I will say this mid-career thing. So when you guys as postdocs, you're, assuming you want to go, academia, the idea is, oh, well, I get a postdoc, I become an assistant professor, I get tenure, and nobody ever tells you what happens after tenure. Is you're not that old when you reach tenure. You think you're going to be, but the reality is you're getting tenure in your mid 30s, late 30s, even early 40s. You've got a lot of your career left, right? And so what do you do? And so that surprised me. There really isn't a lot of training. I think they're starting to come up with it, but there's really a lot of training on what to do at that mid-career point. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really great you shared that because you tried it out and you discovered that maybe this is not for me. But you did kind of explore that road and say, okay, I'll see what it entails and examine what really excites me. So to kind of keep that possibility open.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do. And that's what I do recommend, going outside of your comfort zone to see, because maybe you'd love it. Maybe you think you don't want to do it. And maybe you'd love it, so you do have to kind of go outside of your comfort zone a little bit to see. Yeah.
So what questions do you all have? This is your time with
And
Jennifer.
I don't hold back. I take personal questions. My students will tell you, when I get on with them, the first question I ask them is not, what's the data look like? It's what's going on? How was the week? How are the kids? Because that's going to tell me, where you are. So I'm happy. I don't hold back. Feel free to, yeah.
So one question I have, I guess, similar to that is you've been in like different types of job fields, so government, industry, academia. What was the work-life balance when you were kind of switching from all of those?
Great question, because you're right. That's why I came back into academia. So that's a great question. So government so the good thing about government is you generally didn't, even though I was in there at a PhD level, you didn't take it home with you, but I was in a lab position where I was overseeing about 10 or 12 different people, all different levels, from high school graduates to master's degrees. And it was 8:30 to 4:30 work. And you literally put in a time card for every 0.25 hours that you didn't work. So this is when I had like a newborn baby and you know what I mean? And you run late, you put in a time card for 0.25 hours of your, so it was very regimented. There was a lot of in that one, there was a lot of pressure. I mean, we were recalling food, we were, if we found something, so we had to do it right. So there was a lot of pressure to get it right, because there was a lot at stake. If we called something, contaminated and recalled that food or pulled it off the shelf and it wasn't, so there was both a pressure. Having said that, assuming there was no emergency, again, it was 8:30 to 4:30. You went home at 4:30 and you didn't take anything home. Now, this was a different era too. Email didn't exist. So that was different, but I hated that. I hated those hours and watching your time so much. I wanted to do my work when I felt like something, but again, it wasn't a thought. It was a regimented position, and it was more attention to detail. It wasn't exploratory type thought. Industry I found to be similar in that a lot of money was riding on things, and there was intense pressure that money was riding on things. The times for and I think it varies by where you work, but the timing wasn't as bad. There was a little more flexibility was there versus the government. And I do hear that still with the government, even though the government does a lot more telecommuting now. It is really you put in your 8 hours and you really, and I just knew from academia, I won't kid you, I came back to academia and I would be working all hours of the night, but I could be there for my kids' stuff in school. And as long as it didn't conflict with my teaching, I could be there for my kids' stuff. So it was really that flexibility. Plus the ability, I mean, I love grant writing. I love, even though it's always a stab at the heart when you come back with an unfunded grant, it's worth it for that one that you get funded, so it's worth it to get. So I love that part of it. So you have to love that part of it too, to be in academia. But that's a great question. It was that intense, pressure, both from a financial point of view, a regulatory point of view, and the lack of flexibility in the time that really drove me back to the academia. Yeah.
Great, thank you. What else? Who else has a question?
Quiet group. I understand.
So I have a question for you. How does it work for you when you're a PI versus co-I? So you've worked with many interdisciplinary groups. What do you recommend? How does that work for you?
So that's interesting you say that, because that goes to those different fields. So USDA is different from NIH, and I always have to remember this. So USDA, there's only one PI. There's no such thing as, there's a PI, and then you can have other people on your grants who are co-PIs. But those co-PIs on a USDA grant, it all goes through the PI, and then it funnels out to the co-PIs.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that's different from NIH, because NIH, many other fields, you can have two, are they called co-Is or
multi-PI? So you could have multi-PI, but there's always like one contact PI who's sort of considered the lead.
Yeah. So to be honest, from a practical point of view, and this may be changing, the PI traditionally, they're the person whose department gets the overhead, the much of the overhead funds. Am I saying the right word there?
Indirects.
Indirects, because then the overhead, but as PI, you also get those overhead. Yeah. You get your share, but the indirects. So those primarily, so when you bring in money as a PI, those indirects come to you and your department and your college. The university is starting to divvy those up a little bit better, but we have faculty who are on other people's grants as a co-PI, and all they ask for is, well, I need 10% of my salary. So I need, this many $1,000. And when you do that, your department doesn't get anything else. Your college doesn't get anything else. You don't get any overhead. So it really is beneficial to you. Again, so that's, boy, that goes back to your first question. That's something I was naive about, right? Is that, I'm bringing in this money and I'm just focusing on the part I'm spending, but, oh, the university just got so X amount of dollars from me and I forgot that, and savvier PIs than I would negotiate that. You would say, oh, well, wait a minute, you just got, 60,000. So my USDA is only 30%. Their overhead is less, but still, out of my current $300,000 grant, the university got $60,000. That means the college got money, the university got money. So you have to recognize, and you're the one bringing that in as the PI. So I don't discourage people. You should definitely be co-PIs on people's grants. I mean, it is good to collaborate. But the reality is you need to do both, in my mind. You want to be both PI you'll see, because of the field I'm in, there's not a lot of people that need an extra food microbiologist on there. I'm not co-PI on a lot of grants, but so that's why I tend to be PI. And like I said, I think that is not always stressed to people enough, the need to be, because that PI is really, that's your career trajectory, right? So when you're on somebody else's grant, it might be what you do and all, but your career trajectory is where you're the primary researcher and you're driving that research. But again, I do understand that NIH gives a little bit more credit to the multiple PIs than I think USDA.
Yeah, it is the funds are equally shared, the indirect.
Yeah, see, and that's not usually with USDA. It's more of a what do you need? What part of your salary do you need? What equipment do you need? Things like that. Yeah.
And I do know you've been very generous with your lab and your -80 fridge and allowing many of us to store samples.
And I want it to be used. Yeah, no, I want it to be used. Yeah.
Right, we have a few more minutes if there's any other questions.
I don't have a question. I just want to make a comment that I'm going to touch base with my previous mentor right now. Just because that brought back memories. So I'm going to make sure I touch base with him because he's guided me a lot.
Yeah, no, it's always good to hear from somebody. Yeah, that don't ever feel like you're bothering us, because it's always good to hear from somebody and know what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, Arun, to find the right mentors. I mean, sometimes it's serendipity. You kind of click with someone and you find someone, but
yeah, it is serendipity. That it's really, it is hard. I mean, to try to, like I said, those matches just came about and worked well, and I don't know how you would prescribe them. You know what I mean? Like, I know there's efforts to do mentorship, but my best mentors have just been, I came across them and we just immediately had a bond, because you need that perfect bond there too, so
yeah, for sure. And I mean, you can seek it out, and sometimes the people who you think would be tremendous mentors are not, and then others are surprisingly generous and giving.
Well, and I think you should all be open to mentoring each other. A mentor doesn't always have to be somebody that's at a very higher level than you. I mean, there's opportunities to mentor each other as well and support each other. I didn't, clearly there's been other people in my career that have mentored me that I didn't include. I realized afterwards, when I started as a teaching faculty, I had tremendous help from faculty who had done a lot of teaching, and we used to do teaching circles, and they were a real resource. I think it's something we should start up within the college, where if it doesn't exist within, I know it doesn't exist within our department, but that's just another way of mentoring, and you can get a group of people together at different levels in their career and do that kind of mentoring. It's not as intense one-on-one mentoring, but it really shares the information that's out there. Yeah.
That's a great point. I know there's like peer, like the Master Teachers Guild, where they come and observe you and stuff, but this is more informal and supportive.
It's much more, this is what the students are doing. This is the latest thing going on. This is the best way to react to this type of thing with the student. So yeah, it's
great.
Yeah. It's really, I learned some wonderful lessons.
So we are at the end of our time together. We really, really appreciate your insights. It's always an inspiration to see how senior faculty have found their way, their journey, their sort of unique scholarly niche, so to speak. So we're very, very grateful you made time. And thank you so much, Jennifer.